Our next speaker is our keynote. It's Sir Hossein Yassai, the CEO of Imagination Technologies. After obtaining his PhD, Hossein was a research fellow at the University of Birmingham. Prior to joining Imagination Technologies in February 1992, he was with ST Microelectronics and Inmos for 8 years, where he set up and managed the DSP and digital video developments. Ultimately, he became responsible for the systems division, including research and development, manufacturing, and marketing. Hossein joined Imagination Technologies in 1992 as CTO, joined the board in 1995, and became CEO in 1998. He was knighted in the 2013 New Year's Honors List for services to technology and innovation. Please join us on the stage.
Thank you very much for that comprehensive introduction. I have to say, I am generally an occasional visitor to DAC, and it's a huge honor for me to be here and talk to you. Usually I come here when there's a big problem, technology challenge many years ago, whether it was a layout-related issue or validation, or having business discussion with some of your key people, whether it's Synopsys or Cadence or others. So I'm very delighted to be here for a different reason, which is to talk to you. And I want to use this opportunity, and before I start what I'm about to say, make a few comments. I have to say, when I started my studies, I was really focused in being an engineer. I thought that was the most important thing, and it was, and even today it is. So I ended up studying electronics and physics and maths, etc. And then, as life developed, I concluded in order to be able to achieve what I want, is best to know a little bit about the business. And in that process, that was at that point that I realized that semiconductor industry is a little bit different. We do amazing stuff in this industry, and when you think about it, every year, and we saw some of that in Anton's speech, that there's a lot of discussion about new technologies. Everything gets better, but it also gets cheaper. And we end up getting paid, most of us feel, most of the time, peanuts for it, despite the creativity that applies in it. And my conclusion is, it's really love that is behind what we do and not logic. Now, I have to say, as someone who's used, either personally or my team have used tools and technologies that EDA industry has created, I wanted to say that from where I sit, there's some amazing engineers and genius people in your industry that create incredible tools and allow people like me and people in chip industry to create unbelievable solutions in the form of chips and software that transforms the world. So I hope, at least in this moment, I have the chance to say thank you. I share your pain in terms of not feeling perhaps you're not appreciated enough, but I do appreciate your effort, and being a mathematician, I understand the complexity of what is being done by this industry, and I respect and value your love for what you do, and that I really mean. So with that, I really want to now move on and talk a little bit about what is going on in the industry, from where we're sitting, and relate that to what Imagination is doing and why. So it will be a little bit of industry and talk about the company to give you an insight as to why things are the way they are. So first of all, perhaps from what I've said, you can gather that I definitely a great believer in making a difference, doing things in a way that improve things, even if that means what we do is disruptive. So this slide really shows an example of the kind of things that we consider when we set out on developing the IP, whether it's next generation graphics, augmented reality, healthcare, or automated cars. It doesn't really matter, but it's about things that are disruptive and will make a big difference. And that's really what is in imagination's DNA. Now, when you start doing that in an IP environment, one of the challenges is that the time, for example, we start developing a new graphics technology or a processor technology, to the time when those products actually reach the market, if you look at the cycle times, you're talking about 6 to 7 years. So you can imagine it's very easy to create the wrong thing, because if you're 6 years, 7 years ahead, very, very easily you could do the wrong thing. So this is really where you need some kind of crystal ball, and some of you heard me talking about that, and that is fundamental. But crystal ball on its own doesn't really help, and the way we go about creating the technologies we do, and I really put this up knowing that there's a lot of engineers here, and I really, of course, I'm not being disrespectful to marketing and management, but really wanted to make a point here as a company that has to spend hundreds of millions of dollars 6 years ahead of the market is quite a difficult challenge. So what do we do with our crystal ball? I mean, one of the things we do, we look at the industry food chain changes, the trends and evolution. And what I mean by that, I mean things like, what is the impact, going back in early 90s, the impact of internet and the cloud, and what would that do to the way the markets work, who is dealing with consumers, and what routes to the market exist. You really have to understand that in order to decide what kind of technologies you develop. The second thing is consumer trends. Some people talk about marketing. I prefer to talk about consumer trends and behavior. Although we're an IP company, you'll be surprised to find out how much time we spend in understanding what consumers might care about 6 years ahead in terms of lifestyle or conveniences or whether it's security, who knows, but we do spend considerable amount of time looking at those things. I'm not going to go through each one of these things at this stage. I'm just giving you the highlights. And of course, one of the very important things is the technology trends. I think if you get that wrong, then pretty much everything else would collapse around you. And by technology trend, I'm talking about specific stuff, for example, in graphics or process technology, which many of you are very involved, and design tools, etc. So one of the points I wanted to make is that what we don't do is to spend a lot of time on spreadsheets and details of specific market data, because 6 years from now you can guarantee they will be different. But what is important is understanding those trends. And I think one of being an engineer or an engineer turned into businessman out of necessity, I think it's very important for engineers to play a major role in this process. I often come across companies where the marketing department decides the product and the engineers go and do it. You couldn't do anything worse than that. I mean, my message to my engineers, you have to take ownership. It really requires the discipline of understanding the market and the trends, the technology, and spend some time and understand the consumers. Now, looking at some of the key trends that we've seen in the recent times, clearly smartphone and tablet market have been massive, massive market. People talking about these markets have matured and slowed down, but even if you look at that now, we're still talking about growth of the order of 20%. It's just it used to be 60%, and now we think, it's not really as good, but it's still massive. I think the other important thing about these markets, this segment, is that the impact they're having on every other category of the product. I mean, Anton mentioned the 10 nanometer device in a car is likely to be the phone. There's a reason for that. So what goes on a phone or a tablet, and some of the feature set are going to migrate into other devices. It may not be the process technology, but the linkages and capabilities will be. Now, another key thing, which I'm sure you've heard, is wearables. I certainly believe this will be a massive segment. And it's probably one of those segments that may or may not be in the latest process technology either, but it will be transformative because it will impact consumer life approach to many things, whether it's ease of use or healthcare, etc. So we think that's a massive segment, and we're already making pretty significant progress there. Now, another important thing is software. With the advent of the open source and plenty other advancements, whether it's HTML, which involves just-in-time compiler technologies, and other solution, portability becoming the norm. The era of having to be tied to an instruction set is over. Or if it is not, it will be in the next couple of years. I think another important trend is IoT and connectivity. I'll talk about that on my next slide, but we certainly see that as a massive area of innovation. Again, similar to some of the stuff Anton said, the innovation may not be at 10 nanometer, but it is certainly in implementation or software or the kind of integration that is required. Now, another area I feel very strongly about is security. Consumers are becoming much more interested and aware of that this is very important. And what we have today, for those of you who are not familiar with this in terms of devices like phones, the security in these devices is very limited. There's a secure context and then an unsecure context. But all the secure data is in the same bucket. Now, if you imagine your health data, your payment data, and everything else is not secure from each other, that is not acceptable. So that is something that we believe is going to change, and there's plenty of work going on in that space. And last but not least, and I think Anton talked about this, Moore's law is, from my point of view, it's really over. Not that we can't scale to 10 nanometer and 7, it's just the cost is not going down anymore. But it doesn't matter for the simple reason that all the nodes are needed for different reasons. So I'm actually quite optimistic about the future of our industry, semiconductor and software that goes with it. And I believe we are at an inflection point. And why is that? Is because of the emergence of a whole host of new segments and new markets. I think we went through a few years like everything was about phones and tablets. If you were either in it or out of it, and life would be good or bad. But I think actually now we're going to see plenty diversity. I haven't captured everything on these slides, but a few of the points, wearable I've touched on. One of the other big areas is home wireless for everything. Now, I'm sure you're beginning to note that wireless capabilities are improving, and that is going to go on and on. But ultimately, within the home, I believe all you're going to have is very nice quality displays that would disappear into the wall. Maybe even when you switch them off, they will look the same as your wallpaper, and you won't even see them, and you stream content to those. Speakers likewise. So you're going to have rendering devices, which are speakers and displays, and then you have your phones and tablet and cloud where you get your content from. To deliver that, there's still plenty of work to be done. And you'll see some pretty exciting products next year that would take this living room to where it really needs to be in terms of consumer ease of use. I think the other area is automation. And I've put ADAS, and there was, again, examples of cars we saw earlier. I believe automation would be a massive area. One is clearly in the car. I think one day, maybe in my lifetime, there will be cars that will drive, but I'm actually less interested in those than the cars that would save people's lives. I think we are pretty close to having products and cars that will make a massive difference on how many people die on the roads unnecessarily. And I think, technologies in terms of vision technologies in the car or wireless connectivity where a car, knows ahead of the driver that there's an accident 500 yards ahead and would slow down and not pile into the other cars. There's many, many things like that. So I'm a great believer in ADAS. And I actually think there'll be regulation, and soon, maybe in 5 years' time, we won't be able to drive cars that have accidents. And I think that's actually very exciting. I like the driverless car, but I'm less excited about it than safe cars. I think the other thing to talk about briefly is IoT, or if you like, IoE. I take a different view about these things. You can sit down and consider what does IoT mean. Is it connected devices? Is a phone an IoT, or does it make a difference? The way I look at this market is that this is about solving the mega problems that the human societies have and will have. And I've highlighted the three that I believe are central. One is the healthcare. We have aging population around the world. I'm certainly fully aware of what that means in the UK. We have to deliver better health service and cheaper and reach many, many more people. I think technology, connected devices will make a huge difference. We are working with partners where you put a tiny monitor on a patient and you're essentially monitoring them like an intensive care unit for a $5 cost. That is a massive change, which will mean you can do much better healthcare. Energy is another one. I think I don't need to say anything other than if you monitor stuff, you can make sure you're using what resources you have better. And of course, agriculture and farming. I think there's a lot to be done with tiny devices, keeping an eye on what goes on in livestock or plants, etc. I think that will be a massive improvement in the way we're using the resources. I think those will be big deals. And of course, no need to probably highlight, but of course, real data and big data analytics will be pretty important. I'll share with you one example as we are working with retailers. It's a bit using like ADAS, the advanced technology in the car for a completely different application. Now, if you look at retail, the online retail industry has made the life very difficult for the traditional retailers. And one reason for it is if you're an online retailer, you know a lot about your consumer by their activities on the website and what they're buying, etc. In contrast, in a store, the retailer hasn't got a clue what is going on. Now, imagine that there were cameras, and I'm not talking about spying on people, I'm talking about collecting data about your business. The cameras in stores that they can monitor people's interest and views about what they see, how long they look at a particular product, what age they are, what their ethnic backgrounds are, etc., etc. Which means that the retailers, traditional retailers, could actually understand what their customers want. I found out working on this project that there are 21 muscles in your face, and exactly where they are expresses your emotions. So it is possible to pretty accurately detect with complex camera technologies and GPUs the emotions that people have. And we actually did a project with one retail partner where they put 2 cameras in shop window, and as the people went past, they could monitor how long they looked at a particular object, were they disgusted or were they happy, did they like what they saw, and that feedback is really amazing. That's just an example. I'm passionate about it, so I'm sharing it with you. I think that those kind of computational capabilities in new markets will be pretty significant. Now, my point on this slide is the semiconductor companies of the future have to change and realize they're not just semiconductor companies. They have to understand the very markets they target. If you're doing mobile phone, fine. You do an Android engine and you're done. But if you want to get in healthcare or you want to get into automotive, you really have to understand those segments and have the domain knowledge needed to succeed. Now, talking about imagination a little bit more, I put a few slides in to make sure that people know who we are, because often they think, we're a graphics company, ships graphics into some famous brands, etc. But we do a lot more than that. Now, we're in all kinds of products. For those of you who know, we acquired MIPS about 18 months ago. And to date, 7 billion devices have shipped with our technology, whether it's graphics or video or processor technologies. And in fact, on a daily basis, about 3 million devices, close to 4 million devices are shipping a day, which use one or more of the technologies we provide. I still would like to get paid better for them, but that's, as I said, the love element comes in and I just get on with it. Now, in terms of working with people, we engage with many semiconductor companies. I'm sure many of our partners are here today. And of course, industry strategic partners, including EDA segments, work with us very closely. Now, one of the things I wanted to share with you is how imagination has arrived to where it is. And I'm not going to bore you. Instead, I'm going to show you some animation to make the point. Now, I remember in mid-90s, I was going around and trying to convince people in the mobile space that the future is about integrated graphics. And I remember I was being told, in fact, by a good friend of mine who, a CEO of a North American semiconductor company, said to me, "You're wasting your time, Hussein. There's not enough pixels." This is mid-90s, so remember the phones were really tiny. And I said to him, "Teeth will be provided." And this is 1993, 94. And I remember trying to convince Nokia to do something with touchscreen and graphics. That didn't work out. But we found other people which were like-minded, and the rest is the history. So the integration of graphics on the processor was a very big deal, particularly in mobile devices and where energy and power and size is very significant. So naturally, video followed. So therefore, you needed HD, low power video to be integrated in this kind of solutions. And and that's done, if you like. In fact, there's hundreds of millions of devices shipped today that integrate CPU, graphics, and video. And what we think the future, particularly with the advent of IoT and connectivity, is that the connectivity will end up on the application processor. And actually, for the very reasons that I was giving, the camera being a significant sensor in a lot of the markets, being automotive, with the retail example I gave you, it become pretty much standard and would be required in the SoC. So you end up with this picture, which is really we set out as an IP company to address. So you need a processor, you need the graphics and video, the camera functionality, and of course, some kind of programmable connectivity that allows you to target all kinds of standards, scalable as well, because you have to do something as simple as a Bluetooth LE, but at the same time, you have to do 802.11, I don't know, AC 2x2, etc. So that's really what drove us as a company. And more recently, we've looked at cloud technologies for the simple reason that the IoT market is a fragmented market. When you talk about healthcare, energy, industry, or agriculture, these are fragmented markets. Unless you deliver something that people can start from, many of these industries have no idea how to do this kind of large number of connected devices. And I'm not talking about phones and tablets. Those are established markets. I'm talking about the new markets. And we put energy into creating cloud technologies to address that market. And that really leads, if you then look at imagination, I was sort of building the story, why we do what we do. We basically, our focus has been to deliver the central processing element in terms of CPU, which we did through addition of MIPS, the connectivity technology and multimedia, and of course, the cloud. Now, one key strategic element of imagination focus is that we have an open policy with our IP. We don't force people to use everything from us. In fact, if you look around yourself, you'll find that our graphics and video have been used with all the CPU architectures, Intel, ARM, MIPS, and same applies. I know of projects where our connectivity is combined with Intel architecture or ARM, and our policy is to be very open. The customer decides what they use, but our job is to make sure that we have the right technologies in place. So if you look at this slightly differently from how we've arrived where we've arrived, we've created these underlying technologies, and with those, increasingly, we're enabling platforms, and then we work with our customers and their know-how and technologies to create solutions that target many, many markets. So today, actually, imagination is operating in all of those segments. We've even gone as far as creating some consumer brands or B2C technologies to make things happen. Anyway, I won't have time to go through those, but that's sort of a give you an insight into what imagination is all about. But I have to reiterate, and this is not a marketing statement, for us, the customers are the center of our business, and our job is to create the technologies that might be needed by them, but exactly how they get deployed is really their choice. Now, as an example of platforms, this is one example of the platforms that we see, very simple IoT concept, and this is about connecting, for example, combining of our N-Sigma connectivity solution and MIPS, and doing clever stuff in the middle so that the power saving and the way this solution works is relevant to as an always off, if you like, and occasionally on kind of device. Another example is a vision platform. I'm sure you gathered from my conversation and talk that vision is very, very important. And from a technical point of view, if you combine the camera ISP engine functionality and video encoder and GPU and have special ways of transferring data and heuristic and metadata between these engines, you can do much, much better. And I believe there's an imagination talk later on today about this on Chip Estimate stand if you're interested. Now, if you look at graphics, what we see in graphics is continued progress in terms of performance. I mean, these figures you see are a rough idea of what has happened in the industry. We started, gigaflops are 3 or 4, only 4 or 5 years ago, and now even the low end is getting to close to 50 gigaflop. A high-end mobile solution is heading to half a teraflop kind of performance. These are amazing capabilities, and I have to say, without the tools and the process technologies, it would not have been possible. I mean, graphics is the technology that pushes everything to the limit. We even find the bugs in people's SoCs often because the subsystem gets stretched, and we often end up being criticized for having bug in the graphics, but ultimately you find out is the subsystem being stretched and shows its limitation. But the performance of the graphics is continuing. Another key thing is bandwidth. Bandwidth is a big deal for graphics designs. And again, we were sub 10 gigabyte. We're now heading towards 50 gigabyte and more, and this will continue to drive what is possible. Now, one of the, if I summarize what has happened in the mobile space, I remember 5 years ago, I stood up somewhere and said, in 5 years' time, the graphics engine would be 100 times faster. In practice, they turned out to be 200 times faster, so I was a factor of 2 out. And again, that shows what this industry does for love. And of course, while that has been going on, we have to keep the power low. And again, some of the design techniques and of course process technology is essential to deliver, X times more performance, but for the same power and often for the same price or less. Now, one of the next things that is coming, and we've invested significantly in this space, and in fact, even acquired a company called Caustic 3 years ago, is ray tracing. This is an area that I see as the next disruption in graphics. And we announced, the first of these in March, and I expect to see products maybe within a couple of years. What ray tracing will do, every time when you mention ray tracing, people assume, oh, it'd probably be better looking graphics. Of course. And we will migrate towards almost realistic. Those of you who watch movies, something like Avatar was created using ray tracing. So imagine being able to do Avatar, content which looks as realistic as possible. It will take a few years. I'm not saying tomorrow, but we're absolutely on path to get to realistic graphics from even a mobile device. But there is something even more important than that. And that is one of the consequences of ray tracing. It makes content creation very simple. Now, I won't bore you with the technical details, but the way to think about it is what YouTube did for user generation content. It made it possible for people to pick up a camera, generate content, and upload it. Ray tracing would do for consumer-generated content creation. Now, just imagine that, in 5-10 years from now, everyone will be able to participate in graphics-generated content. You might think I'm crazy, but that's coming. And of course, one of the things we did was MIPS acquisition. This is really significant for us because, as part of our grand plan, we have to be able to offer a processor solution. And MIPS is a fantastic technology with its history and capabilities. And probably it was the best risk solution many years ago when John Hennessy created that at Stanford. So technologically, it's very strong. We also believe the industry needs it because of the balance you require. Of course, it's very efficient, very small, etc. But our goal with this technology is to make MIPS a true alternative so people have choice. And from what I can see, we're on path to achieve that. In fact, I can share with you that since we acquired MIPS, close to 70 licenses, new licenses. We've secured close to 70 new licenses. So the worry and concern about MIPS has gone away and people are making commitments. Now, another significant thing that we did recently, particularly for those of you who are interested in open source, is the initiative called Purple. This is a foundation which is designed to help and support MIPS ecosystem, but it is open to all the architecture. We've chosen to make it open, and its focus is about portable software from the data center to the device. And significantly, we have some pretty important and industry leaders as founders, including Qualcomm and Broadcom and Cavium and a number of others. So I certainly believe the era of MIPS being back in the business has certainly arrived, and we expect to see significant progress. So in summary, I really wanted to sort of come down to 3 simple comments. One is, I think the winners in the next wave of semiconductor products will be those who focus on the market and leverage the IP. I think that's a clearly very important and visible trend. The process nodes, all of them will be required. I mean, you've heard that from Anton, and I'm sure my TSMC colleague will be telling you the same. So 28 nanometer node is going to be here forever, probably 40 nanometer the same, et cetera, et cetera. We see design activities in all of these nodes. And lastly, and very importantly, system on chip isn't just about the chip. It's about the software, it's about the cloud, and very importantly, it's about the domain knowledge of understanding the markets you're trying to target. But I think the opportunities are immense, and I'm certainly very optimistic about the future. But I would still continue to feel that semiconductor industry being governed by love rather than logic will continue. This will probably last past the Moore's law and all of the next generation sitting here, and we'll do all this hard work for love. But I'm fine with that, and I'm sure you are too. Anyway, thank you very much.